This is a very short video, but it's one I've wanted to make for a time because it covers a subject that causes a lot of confusion. And indeed, that confusion surfaces not just in tortoise and turtle keeping groups, social media, but also surprisingly you find exactly the same mistake made in some peer-reviewed scientific papers that get published. Always surprises me that that doesn't get picked up in editing and someone says, hold on, wait a minute, you've not got the context quite right here. But for whatever reason, they don't, and things get out there. And the thing I'm talking about is tortoises eating fruit. Now, we have published over the years a substantial amount of scientific literature, papers, articles on the physiology and the digestive tract behaviour of arid habitat tortoises in particular. And we know that if they are fed very high sugar content, very high carbohydrate, soft fruits, for example, it causes a lot of digestive tract problems, and in worst case scenarios can be quite rapidly fatal. However, one of the answers that people sometimes come up with when they read that or they hear that is that, oh, fruits exist in their native habitats, they must eat those. Well, it's not quite as simple as it seems. So let's take an example. This is a fig tree growing out in Testudo guaica habitat. Therefore, can we infer from this that it's okay for Testudo guaica to eat this? Well, no, not really. First thing to note is that figs are not native to this particular region. They were introduced here many hundreds and hundreds of years ago, but they were introduced here. They were not part of the natural and native diet of this species in this region. There's another difference though too, an even more important one, and that is although wild figs originally evolved in areas of the Mediterranean such as Turkey and Iran and Iraq, from that area, they were totally different from the figs we have here now. Now, these are cultivated figs. These have been selectively bred by us to be bigger, much, much, much sweeter and much larger than the true wild fig. The true wild figs, and I have actually seen those in the wild in Turkey, are much smaller, quite bitter, quite unpalatable actually, and really, really small and quite hard. They are totally different. There are certain species of plant out here and in North Africa and Western Africa that do have fruits that do occur in the habitat of tortoises. Now, they tend to be, however, really very small and quite hard. This is a fruit of the tamarisk. Now, also there are acacia fruits in Sulcata habitat. They too are very small, very hard and quite bitter. They're absolutely nothing like melons or peaches or anything like that. They are very, very small, very hard, and they often have quite a hard stone in them. So the amount of flesh on them is very restricted. So even if a tortoise does eat those, and they would only have a short period in the year when they can do that. So fruits have seasons, as we know, and the fruiting season is quite short. So even if a tortoise was to come across it, and even if it was to find some lying on the floor and eat it, the amount they're going to get throughout a year is absolutely minimal. There's one other thing to bear in mind about this, which is that if fruits are on a tree, it's not predominantly tortoises that are going to be able to take advantage of them. Instead, it's birds. And in many cases, some of these birds are scavengers, birds of prey, and they're actually hazardous to tortoises. Exactly the same thing applies to fallen fruits on the ground. So if we have figs on the ground, for example, that attracts foxes, or it will attract rats and other scavengers. So these are quite a dangerous place for tortoise to be. So these animals are also far more efficient at getting these than any tortoise would be. So although there are cases, and genuinely there are reports where, for example, in Turkey, tortoises have been seen eating fallen fruit from fig trees, these are not the wild figs again. These are cultivated figs. They're completely different. I have no doubt at all that tortoises, if they encountered a wild fig, would probably eat it. But they're actually quite sparsely distributed, and they're not going to be encountering them very often. So we have to take this argument that there are fruit or fruiting trees, fruiting plants in the native habitat very carefully. And instead of accepting it at face value, look behind the face to see the reality. The type of fruit that it is, that it's not a cultivated, would not be a cultivated variety, but a wild variety. And also that they're quite sparsely distributed and only occur for a very limited number of weeks per year. Put all that together and we can see that fruit eating, certainly in the sense that most people understand it, is a pretty rare thing for most arid habitat tortoises. And when we combine that with the overwhelming evidence and the veterinary reports of problems after tortoises have been fed on supermarket fruits, cultivars that are packed with sugars and rich fleshy fruit, that is a completely different thing, and we need to be very careful about extrapolating from that to claim that it's natural for tortoises to eat fruit. Many other species have been introduced into these regions. For example, over the last 500 years, Opuntia cacti were introduced, but Opuntia do not occur naturally anywhere within the Mediterranean. They are a New World species from the Americas, Mexico predominantly. So these were brought over here and planted, and they are highly invasive. That is why we tend to see them today in Mediterranean and West African and North African habitats, but they're not native to the region, and they were not and never have been part of the natural diet of Testudo species, or, for example, Sulcata, any species, in fact, that occurs in Africa or Mediterranean Europe. They are native to the Americas, where they certainly are eaten naturally by some of the tortoise species there, but not here. No matter how carefully we look in these habitats, you are not going to find loads of fruit trees with nice, rich, ripe, fleshy, sweet fruits on them that are falling on the ground to feed tortoises. That simply doesn't happen. The only time you will find that are on plantations or where those species have been introduced. And in many cases, in any event, the very sweet, fleshy fruits that are introduced cannot survive in these super arid environments. They need higher water inputs. There are, of course, species that will survive. Date palms can live here to some degree, but again, they're not from here, they're from Iraq. So figs, you know, other species like that, yes, you will find them, but again, introduced, and they're cultivars. So we cannot simply assume that just because there's a few reports in the literature of them eating these things, that automatically implies that it's appropriate, or that is what they really would have been doing before we came along and changed the environment by introducing things that were never originally here.